Hello, my name is Dennis. I'm the English pastor here at Vinewood CFC in Berkeley.
And hello, my name is Chris. I'm the Vinewood English minister at CFC Berkeley.
And I want to welcome you to our podcast, Heard It Through the Grapevine, where we hope to encourage you in your faith and knowledge of God by giving you biblical and theological clarity to your questions about life and faith. And today we have a very special guest, a longtime member of our church, Sik-Lam. And I just want to turn the time to you. He is a marriage and family therapist, and he's been a former deacon. Just recently stepped off because he said he was going to prison because he had a prison ministry, and that was just a little. It was just really funny the way he told our deacons. But we're just so thankful to have Sik-Lam, just someone who's been a bedrock at our church. So Sik-Lam, welcome. Can you just maybe briefly introduce yourself to our listeners?
Okay, I'm Sik-Lam Wong, and I guess the most notable thing about me is that I've been at this church since 1971, I think. 72, definitely. 72. And so I've been here for quite a while, and that's maybe my only claim to fame. I was a grad student here at Cal, and I ended up staying here just basically for the last so many years, except for a couple of years that I was away. So yeah, my training was in actually plasma physics, but the Lord let me gave me the burden to work on mental health issues within the church and within the Chinese community. And so 20 years ago, 2000 actually, I felt a call to go back to school, and I ended up at Western Seminary and get a degree in marriage and family therapy. So here I am.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And I mean, that's just crazy. Plasma physics.
Yeah.
Was it a master's or a doctorate?
I got my PhD at Cal.
And so for all you listeners, especially the young ones here, you never know what the Lord will do. You might be working hard and being faithful to what you're studying now. And sometimes the Lord will change directions. And now Sik-Lam has been working for many years in mental health, especially in the church, the Chinese setting, Chinese church. And you are trilingual?
Yeah, I offer therapy, of course, in English and Mandarin and Cantonese.
That is amazing. And so we're just so thankful to have you because the question we have today is right up your alley. Chris and I are definitely much younger pastors in that regard, and we're so thankful to have your wisdom. And we're just going to jump right into it because I feel like you have so much to share and so much to say and to encourage me, Chris, and the rest of the listeners today. And one of the questions we received, it was from one of our listeners. They sent it in, and they asked this question: how do you gauge the spiritual and or emotional health of the church, and how can we as lay people be more attentive to that? And so I just want to kind of give the time up to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's a big topic. I don't know how to start, but maybe we can break into two parts. So, or maybe even more than that. But so part one is like this on the individual level. So, the church is made up of people, right? So if in each individual, if each church member, if each Christian in the church is not moving forward, then it brings down the progress of the church in a way. So what we like to see is that we see, of course, in terms of the spiritual growth of spiritual health of the church, we have to look at the spiritual health of each individual. Okay, so that's one thing to think about. And then after that, I see the second part, at least the second part, is that Well, if it's just individuals, then it is not really a church. A church is an organization. Like in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, it talks about the church as the body, right? With hand and feet and eyes and ears and so on. So it is more than just the pieces, because when you add it all together, it is one united organism that it works together. So that is the second part I think we need to address as a church, together. And how can we address the issue? Maybe we don't have time to work on that today, but at least that's one thing I would like to mention. And then the third part was like, there's some question about the mental health piece as well, or how we can help, or how can we help others. And that, I guess, will bring into the maybe how a little bit of the mental health, maybe a matter more on in terms of like fellowship and so on. Okay, so maybe so there may be like three parts that we want to address. So in terms of part one, on an individual level, how can we gauge our own, say, growth? And I see that it's not a linear kind of thing. It goes up and down, like it or not. And there are times when we feel closer to God, and there are times when we feel less. And but the main thing is like this, and somebody said actually, I read some places like this, and I agree with it. And it says like, we can look at ourselves at the end of the day and say, okay, look, am I closer to God during this past year or during this past so many months? Am I able to listen to his voice, understand his guidance in my life? So that's one piece. Second thing is like this. Do I love God and love others more than I was, say, a year ago? Do I love God and love others more than a year ago? And the third thing that is sort of interesting thing that was brought up was that, am I an easier person to work with than a year ago? And I think the third one is actually quite interesting. It's like sometimes it goes back to the theology, right? It's always about love. It's always about our relationship with God. But for some people, love piece is hard to internalize because of background from the past. All right, or maybe for whatever reason. But so the issue is that, do I really love God? Do I really trust that I'm loved by God? Mm-hmm. So this is the relationship part. And if I really believe that I am loved by God, then I'm not so much tied to performance. It's okay if things do not work out. If things that I like to get, I did not get. All right? But I'm still loved. I don't have to perform. And I think that's a very important piece, is that oftentimes, in this world and growing up, we have been sort of conditioned to performance. You need to get a 4-point average. No, not 4 points, 4.5. And these days, in some schools, they ask for 5 points, right? Crazy. But that's oftentimes we are encouraged to do something and get our positive feedback by having good grades or whatever. Mm-hmm. But as Christians, that's not how it works in terms of our relationship with God. I think the most important piece is that, do I love God? Do I realize I'm loved by him? Because I don't. If I do not feel if I don't really believe I'm loved by God, then there will be distortions. I mean, there are a lot of people who work so hard for God. And at times then you ask, wow, gee, that's great. But at the same time, he said, there's pitfalls there too. Like, do I get into a works kind of theology? Okay, so maybe I'm treading on thin ice at this point, getting into dangerous zone here. But the more important piece is like this: before we do anything, is that we have to be sure of God's love for us, and we have to be sure of our love for God. So that's one piece. And let's see, that is the issue of loving others, right? I mean, we mentioned earlier the issue of loving others. So I can be sitting at home doing, daily devotions, doing my prayers and so on, and it does not translate into action to show my love, to show our love for others, whether other Christians, brothers and sisters in the church, or whether it is outside the church, people that God put around us, or maybe, say, marginalized people that have been forgotten all along, let's just say. So how do we think of show our love for other people? So something to think about, are we just staying at home? Just be, okay, it's great that, to spend time, a fellowship with other people. Can we, maybe you should think about that a little bit more, about besides having a close fellowship with friends, with other Christians, the areas that we can serve, areas that we can go to people that we can share the gospel, go to people to show the love of God. I still remember one time, many years ago, I was, we were serving church, CFC. We took a team of people every month to the Bay Area Rescue Mission. And every so often, then we'll, after we cook, then we'll sit down with the people, the residents, and have a chat. And I still remember this guy told me, you guys are so different. Most people will come here to invite us to their church, but you come here to cook for us. I still remember that. We went there to serve them. We didn't ask anything. We just here. And they felt the difference. Okay? We're not asking for anything. We're just here. We're just here to love you, to serve you. And they felt it, and they appreciated that. And I appreciate the feedback too. So something to think about. And now the third comment about whether we are easier to work with, to live with, is a very good, in a way, check, a gauge on, say, our spiritual growth. Because it goes back to the idea of love versus works. A lot of people work themselves to death, okay, do so many things, and you know what? They are hard. They get all stressed out. And you know what will happen is that they get to be difficult to live with because they're stressed out, right? So that is actually a gauge to say, if I am so stressed out that I find it difficult, or other people find it difficult to live with me, to work with me, then maybe something is not quite right. I have to sort of think about it, think carefully. What's happening here? Okay, what's happening here? So that seems to be. I found those three comments, the three things, rather interesting in terms of gauging our spiritual growth individually. I don't know if it makes sense or not.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm hearing. I think it's been really good just to listen because for us, when we start really, uh, the question really brings it back to the individual person and member that we need to carefully gauge and look into our own hearts and our own lives on our own spiritual health. And I'm hearing a few things. One, it has to be based on theology, and not just theology in something that is just in your head or intellectual, but how does it play out? Uh, are we living, you know, living out the greatest commandment, like love God and love others? And is our identity grounded in knowing that God loves us, and it's not by what we do? And I think that's like one of the biggest things, right? Like our spiritual health, whether it's good or bad, really ends up being what's the foundation of that, where your spirituality, your spiritual well-being, I would say, lies. Are you standing on the solid rock of Jesus Christ and his words, on who he says we are, who he says he is, and what he calls us to do? And I love how you give a long-term trajectory here, right? And a lot of times, especially um, for a lot of people in general, especially and even for Christians, we try to measure how we are doing on a day by day or week by week. But I love how you are saying, how are you 1 year ago from now, getting a much longer time frame, long-term trajectory? Because sure, maybe last week I was not as feeling as great as I am this week. But I think that really allows the person to take a more macro view. It's like, all right, let me really consider, where was I a year ago, and instead of just maybe writing the current emotion of that moment, they are able to look through what has been happening this past year and get maybe a little bit more accurate picture of their own spiritual health. And I love the last one. It's just so practical, right? Are you easy to work with other people? And I love that how you just said that it was just a measure of, when we are not doing well, one of the ways is we might not be as tolerable around other people. And there is a accountability, right? Like trying to gauge how we are doing. Uh, we have to bring other people involved. Like I cannot truly diagnose or say or evaluate if I've been easy to get along with, right? I would need my wife to be honest and tell me, like, no, you're not, right? Like, or Chris, or the people who I work in ministry, or my friends, etc. There has to be an outside voice that can come, that we give space to speak honestly and clearly about those type of issues. So I think, I mean, that's just kind of like what I've been learning, what I've been hearing, and just wrapping things up. The way for you as listeners, those are some really practical steps on how we can gauge and evaluate our own spiritual health, very tangible, step by step, and with a long-term view. Um, well, I don't know. What are some of your thoughts, Chris? Anything, or what
Yeah.
are some of the things you've learned?
Yeah. And so, it's great. I have tons of books on this stuff. But really what first comes to mind is, like, I preached on this last week. Gauging someone's spiritual and emotional health is really challenging because it's not something um, you can't look into someone's soul or their head, right? And what I mean by, I preached on this last week, is you will tell their spiritual and emotional state by their fruit. And I think that goes to the last point, right? But it takes time for a tree to grow and then the fruit to come.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time, right? And
Mhm.
I think with this question, I don't want to say that maybe the question's misguided, but it almost seems, especially the second half, how can we as lay people be more attentive to that? It almost seems as if, well, if we're good spiritually and emotionally, then we don't need to, we don't need to help, right? We're fine. But I think the reality of this question is understanding that we're actually, if you look at this on one level, as a leader or whatnot, there's always going to be areas that we're not healthy in. You're never satisfied, right? And then there's other areas that, okay, are decent. But the reality is having a humble attitude and knowing that actually we're just never there. Until Christ comes back again, you're not going to be spiritually satisfied or emotionally satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because of sin, right? That's obvious. And so So have this mindset that we're actually never there. And actually the goal is for us when we talk about these strategies of how to gauge is, are we at least going up? Right? Are we at least getting a little bit better day by day, week by week, year by year? Am I better? Right? That's a good question to ask, which I really appreciate from you, Sik-Lam. Now, going back to my Jesus's analogy, you'll tell by their fruit, and we all talked about this, is loving God and loving neighbor. I think one of the biggest things we can do or gauge our spiritual and emotional well-being as a church is how obedient are we to God's word in doing these things. Are we praying? Are we reading the word? You know, I hear so many people, like, you know, when I was a recipient of this, pastor saying, pray and read. Oh, okay, fine. It actually wasn't until I became a pastor that I was telling other people pray and read that I realized, oh man, these people just don't. They don't pray and read, you know. One of the biggest signs is, are you actually doing what God says, right? I think, and one of the biggest fruits is love of people. In his book by Francis Chan, Letters to the Church, there's a section on loving people, and he says this: he wants you to love a people. This is Jesus, okay? He wants you to love a people group so much that you are broken over their lostness and sacrifice your life to bring the gospel to them. And he goes, we suffer because we love people, even our enemies. And so when we talk about do you love, the other aspect of it is, are you suffering well? Are you suffering well? I think when we talk about emotional health so often, especially in America, the rise, maybe you can correct me, but this is just my feeling. We've developed or almost coddled individuals to the point of anything other than comfortable is bad, right? Like anything, if just a little bit of anxiety, something's wrong with me, I need to go see a therapist, or a little bit of loss or depression of something, you know, it's the end of the world, something along those lines. But actually everything I read in scripture, if you really want, especially the Psalms, my gosh, there's a lot of lamentations even, right? There actually in here, it doesn't even, reading the word, it doesn't even show any semblance of emotional steadiness. There's a lot of ups and a lot of downs, but what stays constant are they suffering well? I think in the Christian life, if you believe that you won't suffer, that's a lie from Satan, right? That is a lie from Satan. What Jesus does say is have joy, or Paul is joy in suffering, right? Joy in suffering. So these downs in life will come regardless. But a sign of spiritual health is how well are you embracing that suffering, right? Knowing that God is there. And one of those things is like you guys said, am I easier to work with regardless of the scenarios that are coming my way? And I feel like COVID-19 and shelter in place is revealing a lot of that in people. Great time for reflection. Actually, I'm not as patient. I'm actually an angry person. And these are things that you can begin to work on. I know in my life, especially, you know, with Tamai and Hannah, we're stuck in one room and we're just, tensions rise, you know, and I realize I'm not as patient as I thought I was. I'm not as loving as I thought I was. And you begin to work on these things, right? And so, yeah, those are just my 2 cents.
And,
Yep.
yeah,
So-
so what? Oh, go ahead, Sik-Lam.
So let's follow on what Chris mentioned in terms of suffering well. They mentioned about COVID-19 and so on. And look, I'm an older person. I'm probably the oldest person in English congregation. Okay. And so it's only a matter of time then when I would be sort of like not able to do things physically, counseling, whatever, right? I'll be going downhill. And a question that I ask myself, and I share with others too, is a question of like, at your deathbed, when you're in your hospice, let's just say, when you cannot do anything, the question for ourselves is like this: do I still know that I'm loved? If I am loved by God, then the suffering part, in a way, I can, maybe it's easy to let go. Maybe you have to go there before I can say it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at least right now, looking at this like this, it is something that we all would have to face, suffering and death. And so that's life. And at the end of the day, again, it goes back to, can I give all this up and still know that I am loved, and I can go, I can let go. I can let go. I can face, say, adversity. I can face disappointment because I know I am loved. I don't have to. I don't have to, get into a big project. I don't have to write a paper. I don't have to, whatever. You can just fill in the blanks. But at the end of the day is that, am I loved? If I'm loved by God, if I know I'm loved by God, then all those are not important anymore.
Yeah,
Right?
that's really
So when Paul talked about joy, Paul was looking at it and say, as compare. And he was talking in Philippians, I think. I consider all this as garbage, as rubbish. In terms of comparing that to the love of Jesus, right? It's all rubbish. So the point still goes back to, am I loved? Do I know I'm loved? Do I feel I'm loved? That's a very basic question that we would have to think of it ourselves and help other people to explore that. I mean, it takes a lot of exploration to really, given people's upbringing, it may not be easy to accept that God's love is unconditional. It may not be people may not be able to let go of the idea that I have to perform. It's a two-edged sword. It's a fine line. Of course, we want people to serve in church. Of course, we want people to be missionaries. Of course, we want people to go out and all that stuff. And yet, at the same time, whether the person doing it can say and know that I'm doing it, great, but it is God doing it through me. And I know I'm a sinner. I can be a missionary. I can be somewhere in the world, going to a faraway place. I still carry my sin with me wherever I go. I still have my weaknesses. I'm not perfect. So, and I need to be aware of it and be humble about my shortcomings too. So that's a very important piece. It goes back to our relationship with God, our love for God, and be able to accept His love for us. And in a way, that brings it to the other piece too, in terms of how can we help others? Maybe the question, maybe another way to put it is that, how can we model the love of God? How can we reach out to the other person to offer a listening ear? How can we enter into the other person's world? John in chapter 1, it talks about, and God and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And what happened? And then we can behold His glory. Right? Think about it. How can we enter another person's world or be part of another person's world so that we can demonstrate the love of God, and then they can behold the glory of God through us? So it takes a lot of love on our part and prayer on our part to go there. And I'm not saying it's easy. It takes a lot of say maturity to get there. But it brings into play the idea of am I my brother's keeper, right? I mean, I need to sort of get out and interact and care for other people. So again, it's not easy, and some people have different personalities, right? Some people are more introverted, some people are more extroverted, some people, for them it's easy, for other people it's harder. So God knows all those. We don't have to worry about that. God knows. But what can I do in terms of like sort of like modeling God's love by entering into somebody's life? That's another thought I would like to bring up.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely just covers that last part when the question was asking how can we as lay people be more attentive to the spiritual and emotional health of the church. And it's such a simple answer, but it's very difficult to do, which is being involved in the lives of other members of the church. you can't evaluate it or know it or be attentive to it from afar. And just like what Sik-Lam was saying, is by how we live, modeling it, showing it, giving people the grace and kindness that maybe they don't deserve. Maybe somebody isn't easy to work with at that moment. And for us as attentive members of the church, how we can really help in that regard is to be more gracious to them in those times, not hold their sins against them during that time. And to be able to show them what that is. As we're wrapping up, we're running out of time. Any closing thoughts from you, Chris? Or let's do it this way. Closing thoughts from Chris.
Yeah.
We'll have closing thoughts from Chris, and then last words from Sik-Lam, and then
Sure.
We'll wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start off with my thoughts on how we can gauge, and then I'll share some resources. But really, like you guys said, the greatest thing that we can do is enter people's lives, and that's how we gauge the spiritual health. And like you said, Dennis, it's a lot easier said than done. I think the reality, one of the greatest signs of a unhealthy church is the lack of discipleship, and surprisingly, many churches don't do that. Right? And what I mean by discipleship is not simply just attending a small group or going to fellowship or just saying, how are you doing? I think it involves a smaller group of people, much like the way Jesus really invested in their lives. And it's slightly intense. I've done this with a couple people. I'm still doing this with a couple men. You just simply if you want something practical, think about your sphere of influence, right, as a church member, and who, maybe a couple people that you can bring under your wing. Right. A good metaphor that I've heard of when it comes to discipleship is kind of apprenticeship. Where there is, when you are learning a trade or a craft, the first thing that you are is an apprentice, right? And you learn from a master, right, who's really, really good at it. And you learn from him until you get to a point where you can go on your own, and you're called a journeyman, where you practice and you hone your craft even more without being taught. You have the ability to self-teach. And then after a while, then you are eligible via examination or whatnot to become a master. And the difference between a journeyman and a master is now you can bring someone underneath you. Right. And I think that's the beautiful picture of discipleship. Actually, the amazing thing is as you struggle, that all of this kind of actually happens simultaneously. As you're an apprentice, you're also a journeyman and a master, because that's what the Holy Spirit living and dwelling in you is moving you towards. Right. That's what Jesus commands at the Great Commission. Right. Make disciples and teach them all that I have commanded you. Right. And so one of the hardest things, I would say, especially for the Asian church, is we're not really good at getting into people's lives and knowing kind of the deep, dark secrets, and not willing to be vulnerable with each other. I think that's just a challenge that we face. And along with that is we're unwilling to keep people accountable, as in like get on their case hardcore, right? When you challenge them to do something, whether it's read a book, go through the Bible, and we end up slacking, right? It's like, it's okay. No, just be on them about it, right? And see how they're doing. That's one of the greatest gauges of seeing the health of the church is, are you disciple making, right? And actually actively not letting them go and fall into the cracks. And I said I would give you some resources. Peter Schazer actually has a really good series of books. The first one is An Emotional Healthy Leader That's one. The next one, which is the question that we're faced with, is the emotional healthy church. That's a good one. And then the last one is the emotional healthy spirituality. So it's a good series of books. They come with workbooks. And so if you wanted resources to help kind of on this topic, go for it.
And any last words from you, Sik-Lam?
Okay. I think there's a third question that we didn't have time to address today. Is besides just being individual members of this church, and there's an issue of the church itself as an organization, as an organism. How can we gauge the spiritual health of the church? And I think maybe that we can talk about some other time. And I'm thinking more in terms of like an organization, if it is alive, if it is well, then it'll be moving forward. It would have vision and it would have influence in the society. But maybe, it's a different topic, different time.
Thank you so much, Sik-Lam, for joining us. Is there any way for our listeners to be able to reach you for more resources if they have any more questions or anything like that?
Or they can always email me, siklamwong@gmail.com. And I'm more than happy to talk with people and chat and so on.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. That is all the time we have for this week. I want to thank you for our listeners for tuning in and supporting us during this time and during this podcast. And we hope you will keep on submitting your questions to us. There is a link in the description. And
maybe we should put a pause on the submission of questions, partially because just a quick announcement for all of you. Actually, Dennis and I will be taking, in an effort based on this question, the spiritual and emotional health of the church and individuals. We also will be gauging our emotional and spiritual health by taking a break from our podcasts. Right. We've completed season 1 of Heard It Through the Grapevine. And so we really want to thank you guys for submitting your questions, but we're going to be putting a hold on it. We still actually have a whole bunch of other questions that you've all submitted that we're still going to filter through and look through, but for now we're going to take a pause, and hopefully we'll be back soon for all of you answering more questions.
That's right. Yeah. So if you still have any more questions, feel free to submit, but we will be taking a break. Yep. And we hope to be joining you soon. So until then, hopefully this has been a very encouraging time for you and that you've grown and learned. So love y'all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.